thank you. It is so good to be back here with you guys and for this opportunity to share this presentation on prophecy in action, actually. What we will be talking about tonight is happening right now, though the world is asleep and doesn't see it. When we talk about prophecy, Revelation 19:11 says, "For the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy." Because all the word, all the prophetic verses, utterances in the scripture point to Messiah, Jesus. And so we are going to be looking at that this evening, and I've tried to keep it as brief as I can, but then again, I may not. I don't know. My family is here, my sister and sister-in-law, nephew, niece-in-law, niece, and they have already seen this. So I'm sure that they are here just to heckle me. But anyway, for those of you who don't know me, I am Max Lankford's son. My disability is cerebral palsy, which is basically brain damage from birth. So if I get confused, it's the brain damage from birth. But anyway, so that's cerebral palsy. It's a condition. It's not a disease. It doesn't get worse. So that's that. Now, what we see here will be further explained as we go through this presentation. It's weird having everybody sitting on one side of the church. Hopefully the church won't tilt or tip over. These will make more sense as we go through, because these will be part of the PowerPoint as we go through this. Well, I'm talking about the blood moons. Have any of you not heard about the blood moons? It's John Hagee has a book called The Blood Moons, which I haven't read. So none of this is based on his stuff. Because I haven't read his stuff. But we are going to be looking at it. We're going to be seeing some things that I think are going to blow your minds and what's coming up. So let's start at the beginning in Genesis 1:14. And God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens." This is from the ESV, the English Standard Version. "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night. And let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years." So we're right off the bat, we're given the reason for the lights in the sky, the stars, the sun, the moon, and that to separate the night from the day and to be for signs. The Hebrew word for signs is oath. It means a signal, a beacon, or evidence. A signal or beacon, something that points to something else. A beacon, a signal. So let them be for a beacon, a signal, evidence, and for seasons. The Hebrew word for seasons is moed. This is very important as we go through this study. Moed, the word moed. And it means appointed time, a set place. So, in Genesis, right off the bat, we're told the purpose of the stars and the lights in the sky is to mark his appointed times, his moed, to mark his appointed times. Now, what are his appointed times? We'll see this as we go through. And whenever Jesus, throughout the Gospels, there were several incidences when Jesus was in trouble. And he said, don't worry, this isn't my appointed time. He was speaking about something, the appointed times, which God gives us. Okay? So, the stars, sun, and moon declare God's moed, his appointed times, that which is translated as seasons, moed. Now, Leviticus 23, verse 2. The feasts declare God's appointed time, the Jewish feasts. Leviticus 23, 2. These are the appointed feasts of the Lord, that ye shall proclaim as holy convocations. They are my appointed feasts. The word for feast, moed, appointed times. So, the sun, the lights in the sky are set there to mark his moed, his appointed times. And now God declares in Leviticus that the Jewish feasts are to declare his moed, his appointed times. The Jewish feasts. God is on a Jewish calendar. Most Christians know nothing about the Jewish feasts, which is a shame, because this is God's calendar. We'll look at what these feasts are. These feasts are, or moed, these appointed times are described in Leviticus 23 through 25, chapters 23 through 25. And there's seven being the number of completion. These 7 feasts are Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, Pentecost. Those are in the spring. And then you have the fall feasts, the trumpets, the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur. Yom is Hebrew for day. Kippur, atonement, Day of Atonement. And then the 7th is the last feast or moed, or festival, in the Jewish calendar, and that's the Feast of Tabernacles, or booths. The Hebrew word for booths, and that's B-O-O-T-H-S, booths. The Hebrew word for booths is Sukkot. That's how I use the word Sukkot, because that's the Hebrew word for the Feast of Tabernacles, or the Feast of Booths, is the Feast of Sukkot. So, these are the 7 feasts, God's calendar. Now, let me show you how they fall in the Hebrew calendar. Passover is on Nisan 14. In our calendar, that's in April, May, March, April, around there, Passover. It begins on Nisan 14. That is the day that the Hebrews, the Passover lamb was slain in that afternoon on Nisan 14. Notice first, though, that God's Hebrew calendar, God's calendar, is on a lunar cycle. Our calendar is on the solar cycle, but God's calendar was on a lunar cycle. So that each day begins at sunset. And we get this right out of the creation week, where it says, and the evening and the morning were the first day. The evening and the morning, the second day. Evening, morning, evening, morning. And even today, the Jewish day starts at 6 p.m. at sunset. Their day starts in the evening and goes until 6 p.m. the following day, okay? So that's the evening and morning. That's their calendar. That's what God set up. They're on the lunar calendar. So Passover begins on Nisan 14 at 6 p.m. 6 p.m. And Nisan, the month of Nisan, in the Bible, in Genesis, Exodus, it's called Abib, A-B-I-B. The Abib or Aviv, A-V-I-V. That word was changed after the Babylonian captivity. They changed Abib to Nisan. So that's what it's called now, is Nisan. That's the first month of their agricultural season, the feast season. And it begins on Nisan 14, Passover. Nisan 14 is the day that the Passover lamb is slain. And Exodus 12 is when this was instituted, the night of the Exodus. You know the story. God told Moses, you get your lamb and slay it and put the blood on the doorposts. And then you eat the lamb tonight, standing up. So after they cooked it, in the evening, it would have turned into Nisan 15 that evening. And they said, that's the night you leave Egypt. And because it's in the middle of the month, Nisan 14 and 15, it's always a full moon. Always a full moon. Now, recently, Allie, my wife, and I watched the Ten Commandments, you know, the classic Cecil B. DeMille on Blu-ray. Man, it looks great on Blu-ray. But you know the scene of the 10th plague in the movie where Charlton Heston had the green mist that's going into the Egypt and swirls around the moon. Well, it's only a quarter moon. I said, that's wrong because it should be a full moon. It was a full moon that night they left Egypt. And they could see that night. But anyway, Passover begins on Nisan 14 at 6 p.m. And then it goes to 6 p.m. the following day, which begins Nisan 15, which begins the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That feast goes for 7 days, from Nisan 15 to Nisan 21. It goes for 7 days. And according to Leviticus, the first day of unleavened bread, Nisan 15, and the last day of unleavened bread, Nisan 21, are Sabbaths. That is, no work is to be done, and they were to have a holy convocation assembly. So regardless on what day of the week those days fell, it was a Sabbath. Now, we'll get to when John says they had to get Christ off the cross because it was a special Sabbath. We're going to see what that means. It doesn't mean it was a weekly Sabbath, but it was a Sabbath other than the Saturday Sabbath. You'll see this in a moment. So that week, unleavened bread is 7 days. It lasts a week, from Nisan 15 to Nisan 21. During that week of unleavened bread, the first day after the regular Sabbath, the first day of the week, will be first fruits, the Feast of First Fruits. It was the first day after the regular Sabbath in the week of unleavened bread. Then starting from that day, the Feast of First Fruits, you start counting. That would be day one. First fruits of day one. Then you count 50 days and you come to Pentecost. the Feast of Pentecost. Pente means 50, 50 days. Now, these feasts, the word feast is moed, appointed times. This is God's calendar. These are days in which God will act on these specific days. Passover is the day that Jesus was crucified. He's our Passover lamb. What's interesting, according to Exodus 12, the Passover lamb was to be picked out on Nisan 10. God tells Moses, you pick out the lamb on Nisan 10. And this is in Exodus 12. You pick out that lamb on Nisan 10 and bring it into your home and take care of it. Look over it. Make sure there's no blemish or defect in the lamb. And then on Nisan 14, by sunset, you slaughter it, sacrifice it unto the Lord. We're going to see how all of this pointed to Messiah when he came. It's going to blow your mind. So Pentecost. And now we come to trumpets. Trumpets is on Tishri 1. It's the 7th month in the agricultural calendar. And actually, Tishri 1 is the first New Year. It's their New Year's Day. Tishri 1 is Rosh Hashanah. Have you heard that term? Rosh means head or chief. Hashanah means year, head of the year. The Feast of Trumpets is on Tishri 1. Now, remember, they're on a lunar cycle. So the first of the month is marked by the new moon. You know what a new moon looks like? It's the fingernail moon. You can barely see it. You have to look for it. And because it was so easily missed, they would carry that over to Tishri 2. It's the only one of the Jewish feasts that are over 2 days in case they missed the moon on that first night. Then they were carried over to Tishri 2. Tishri 2, and in our calendar, that is around September, October. It's Tishri or Rosh Hashanah or Feast of Trumpets. So that's on Tishri 1 is trumpets, Feast of Trumpets. 10 days later, on Tishri 10, you have the Day of Atonement. This was the only day of the year in which a high priest would go into the Holy of Holies, was on Day of Atonement. That was the only day that the high priest could go into the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was, and the mercy seat on the Day of Atonement. That's on Tishri 10. 5 days later, you have Tishri 15, the Feast of Tabernacles, or the Feast of Booths, or Sukkot, and that's another 7-day party. The Feast of Tabernacles at the temple was the biggest party of the year, because it was the last. And the Feast of Tabernacles corresponded to the ingathering of the fruit harvest. The end of the agricultural year's over. And they would have a party for 7 days on the Feast of Tabernacles at the temple. During that party, during that time, the priest would come out and do water libation. He put water on the altar, all of the altar, as a thanksgiving for the harvest and a praise for the following year's harvest. It was during this time, and in the New Testament, it's called the Great Feast. The Great Feast. In the New Testament, this is called because it was such a blowout. It was during this great feast that Jesus, and it says, the account says, he yelled at the top of his voice, "If any of you are thirsty, let them come to me, and I'll give you living water." It was during the time when the priest was pouring out the water, and it was a party, so he had to yell to that. But that's Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. Now, this is how it looks on our calendar, comparing the two calendars. You have the spring feast, Nisan 14, then unleavened bread starting on Nisan 15. During that week, the first day following the regular Sabbath, during the week of unleavened bread, you got first fruits. And then 50 days later, from first fruits, you got Pentecost. And then in the fall, you've got the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, Feast of Tabernacles, and the fall feast. All on Tishrei, all within 2 weeks of each other. These are all within a week of each other. In fact, Passover came to cover Passover, unleavened bread, and first fruits. They all became celebrating Passover because they all followed, one right after the other. So they all are referred to as Passover. Then you got Pentecost. Then you got the 3 fall feasts, all within Tishrei 1, trumpets, Tishrei 10, atonement, Tishrei 15, tabernacles, all within 2 weeks of each other. Now, look what happened in the year that Christ, in the likely year that Christ was crucified. This is the Hebrew calendar for Passover, unleavened bread, and first fruits in 30 CE Common Era, or 30 AD. Nisan 10, Palm Sunday. Nisan 10 was when he rode into Jerusalem on the donkey. And that's when the people said, "Behold, the Son of David, Hosanna in the highest." What were they doing? They were picking out the lamb. Just as God told Moses to do on Nisan 10, you pick out the lamb on Nisan 10. Nisan 10, Jesus rides into Jerusalem on the donkey, and they all hail him as Messiah. They picked out the lamb. Now, Jesus said, you bring that lamb into your home and you inspect it to see if there's any blemish. During the 4 days, he was peppered with questions by the scribes, by the Pharisees, by Caiaphas, by Pilate. And what were their response? We find nothing wrong. There's nothing. He's perfect. They didn't know what they were saying, but they themselves were declaring the Passover lamb as guiltless and spotless. And so, Passover, Nisan 14, began the evening of Wednesday evening at sundown. 6 p.m. Wednesday evening, Passover began. That's when Jesus had the Last Supper with his disciples. Even though, watch this, the Passover lamb wasn't slain until that later afternoon and cooked and eaten on Nisan 15, the evening. So what he did, he had a Passover meal with it, because there's no mention of a lamb being eaten during that meal. Why? Because it wasn't sacrificed yet. It would be sacrificed Thursday afternoon. It's when that would be sacrificed. The afternoon of Nisan 14. Nisan 14 began at 6 p.m. on Wednesday. That's when he had his Last Supper. And that's when he initiated the new covenant. And then he's arrested early Thursday morning. He's arrested. He's put on the cross by 9 a.m. on Thursday morning. 9 a.m. Says from noon until 3 p.m. what happened? Darkness covered the land. According to Josephus, Josephus is a Jewish historian that lived in the first century. Most of what we know about Jewish custom and history we know from Josephus. He wrote at the same time that John the disciple wrote. Josephus was writing history. And what we know from Josephus is that the Passover lambs, each family had to bring it to the temple. And the priests, there were hundreds of priests that were there to slaughter that lamb for each family. Josephus says that there will be over 200,000 lambs that would be sacrificed. So the temple mount, the temple court will be rivers of blood from all the sheep being sacrificed. But he tells us that the sacrificing of the Passover lambs did not begin until 3 p.m. It went from 3 p.m. until 5 p.m. on Nisan 14. 3 p.m. until 5 p.m., they would slaughter the lambs. And then they would dress it out, cook it that evening, which would then be Nisan 15. This is something I've never heard preached or read. But based on the account, from 9 until 3, there was complete darkness that covered the land. At 3 o'clock, when Jesus died, that's when the lambs were to be slaughtered at the temple. Thousands of them. But what happened at 3 o'clock when Jesus died? There was an earthquake. And what did the earthquake do? It was so violent that it ripped the veil in the temple in half. And this veil was huge. This veil was about 30 feet high, 30 feet by 15 feet by 6 inches thick. And it rent that veil in two, indicating what? Severe damage in the temple right at 3 o'clock. I speculate, and this is only me speculating, I've never read this or heard it preached, but I speculate because of the darkness, because of the earthquake and the damage to the temple, that there would have been no lambs slaughtered because they would have been repairing the temple, which would mean on this day, Jesus was the only lamb sacrificed that day, with the darkness and the earthquake destroying the temple or doing significant damage to the temple. They would have had to stop all temple activity, which would have meant sacrificing the lambs. So I speculate that on this day, Jesus was the only lamb sacrificed that day. He died at 3 p.m. on Nissan 14. By 6 p.m., Nissan 15 begins, the first day of unleavened bread. That's why they said we've got to get him down before the special Sabbath, because it wasn't the weekly Sabbath, but it was the first day of unleavened bread. And it just so happened this year you had back-to-back Sabbaths. You had Nissan 15 starting on Thursday evening at 6 p.m., going to Friday evening at 6 p.m., and then the regular Sabbath would begin at 6 p.m. Friday evening to 6 p.m. Saturday evening. Then it would get dark. That's why the women did not go to the tomb until the morning of the first day of the week, because they were back-to-back Sabbaths. This makes sense that Jesus said, you look for a sign. The only sign that I'll give you is the sign of Jonah, which was what? Jonah was in the earth 3 days, Jonah was in the belly of the whale 3 days and 3 nights. You cannot get 3 days and 3 nights if he was crucified on Good Friday. It doesn't fit. You can't cram 3 days and 3 nights in a little more than 40 hours. He had to have been crucified on Thursday afternoon, and Friday was the Sabbath, Saturday was the Sabbath, the first day of the week following the Sabbath on unleavened bread is the Feast of First Fruits. That's when Jesus rose. Get this. Jesus is our Passover lamb, crucified on that appointed day. He was buried on Nissan 15, unleavened bread, taking our sin into the ground, burying it. And then on the first day of the week, the Feast of First Fruits, he rose. That's why he's called the first fruits from the dead, because he rose on that appointed day, first fruits. And then you start counting 1, 2, 3, 4. 50 days later, what happens? Pentecost. The Holy Spirit comes to inaugurate the church, to inaugurate and empower the church on Pentecost. According to Judaism, the Feast of Pentecost commemorates the giving of the law. The giving of the law, according to Judaism. That is, the Israelites left on this night. They crossed the Dead Sea on the 17th. Moses was up on the mountain for 40 days. By the time he came down, it was 50 days later. Now this is according to Judaism. The Feast of Pentecost commemorates the giving of the law. What happened when Moses came down with the law? The people had given themselves whole hog to idolatry. He came down and they were partying up. They had made a golden idol, and Moses took the stone tablets and threw it down and broke them. And then God sent a plague on the people. Do you know how many people died? 3,000. 3,000 people died at the giving of the law. When Pentecost in the year 30 came and the Holy Spirit was given, what happened? 3,000 people were saved. The giving of the law brought death. The giving of the Spirit on the same day brought life. The difference between the old covenant and the new covenant. And that was his appointed day, his moed. He would act on that day, and he did. Now, those are the spring feasts, and they all were fulfilled to the day of Jesus' first coming. Now, the fall feast, trumpets, it's the first of the fall feast. What is Christ's second coming associated with? Trumpets. He is coming around the Feast of Trumpets. And because it covers 2 days, Jesus could literally say, you don't know what day. You don't know what day. Or you don't know what hour. But you know when it's right there. He says, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be when I come back. Noah knew within a week when the flood would hit. We will know when Christ comes. He says in 1 Thessalonians, this day will not surprise you like a thief. He's coming like a thief to those who don't know and are in darkness. But he says, you're not in darkness. You're children of the light. And this day of my coming will not be a surprise to you. You will know. Let's go on. How many stars are, I got to speed up, man. How many stars are there in the sky? This is from the Atlantic from last November 19, 2013. There are roughly 7 stars in the observable universe. That's 1 followed by 24 zeros, stars, which is, for lack of a more fitting description, a lot of stars. This is from the article. So there are roughly 7 stars, roughly. That means they have no idea. It's just a guess. We have no idea. But there are roughly 1 with 24 zero stars in the universe. Look what Psalm 147:4 says about our Creator. He determines the number of the stars. He gives to all of them their names. Talking about a smart God. He gives to every one of them their own names. And look how what he names. We have some of these in the Job that he names. Job 38, this is the Mazzaroth. This all goes back to the lights in the sky, the Mazzaroth. Job 38, 31, 32. Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades or loose the cords of Orion? Orion is a constellation. Can you lead forth the Mazzaroth in their season? Or can you guide the bear, that's Ursa Major, the Big Dipper, Ursa Major, with its children, Ursa Minor, the Little Dipper. That's what he's referring to here. And he put these constellations up there and named them. The Mazzaroth is a plural form of Mazzaroth, meaning constellation, or taken as a whole, the zodiac. The zodiac. Now, I'm not going into astrology. Astrology is a perversion of what God set up. God said, I put these out there for a sign or marker for my appointed times. Not to control the times, not to control your life or dictate your life if you're born under a sign, a zodiac sign, no. But there to be a sign to point to his appointed times. Job 38:31 in the Holman Christian Standard Bible. Can you fasten the chains of the Pleiades or loosen the belt of Orion? Can you bring out the constellations in their season and lead the bear, Ursa Major, and her cubs, Ursa Minor? the Jewish Bible, can you lead out the constellation of the zodiac in this season, or guide the great bear and its cubs? So God is talking to Job, said, can you do anything with the stars? Pleiades. Pleiades is interesting. Pleiades is a cluster of 7 stars in the constellation of Taurus. And it's called the 7 Sisters Pleiades. It's a cluster of 7 stars in the constellation of Taurus, and they're called the 7 Sisters. I think it's interesting how God refers to Pleiades a couple of times. And in Revelation, he refers to the churches of Asia as 7 stars. Pleiades represents the 7 churches of Asia, which is in totality the church. Now, who alone stretched out the heavens and trampled the waves of the sea? Who made the bear and Orion, the Pleiades, and the chambers of the south? Einstein was the first one to surmise or posit that the universe is expanding. We have an expanding universe. That is, all the planets, galaxies are moving away from each other. God told Job that. He said, I stretched out the heavens, stretching it out. It is expanding because I'm stretched it out. So Einstein caught up with Job just last century. He makes the stars, the bear, Orion, the Pleiades, and the constellations of the southern skies. Just noting that God made these constellations, and there it is, the Mazzaroth. The 12, we call it the zodiac, but there's a whole lot more than 12 constellations. There's hundreds of them. But what makes the zodiac is they're on a plane called the ecliptic. That is, as the earth is revolving around the sun, this is the apparent path of the sun, and these are all in that path. Okay, that's what that means. And so I've read several interpretations of what these constellations, and it's interesting that there's 12. Why 12? And 12 is a significant number in the Bible. It always refers to a kingdom. A kingdom. Jacob, whose name was Israel, had 12 sons for the kingdom of Israel. Abraham's son, Ishmael. Did you know Ishmael had 12 sons, from whom the Arabs and the Muslims come? That kingdom, 12. And so Jesus chose 12 disciples. His kingdom, 12. So these 12, there's no consensus of what these mean, but in ancient times, Leo, the lion constellation of Leo, referred to Judah, the lion tribe, based on the prophecies in Genesis and Numbers, I think. I may be wrong on that. When it talks about out of Judah, Jacob told Judah, out of you, Judah, a king will arise, and the scepter will not part from his hand. The king will come out of Judah. And it says that a lion, he will be like a lion. So it became the lion tribe of Judah. And Leo was the constellation that was attributed to Judah, associated with Judah. Now, look what this means. The sign that possibly declared Jesus' birth. The pre-dawn sky as it appeared looking east from Babylon on August 24, 2 BC. And over the course of several months, the king of planets, Jupiter, crowned Regulus, the king of stars, 3 times. Crowned Regulus 3 times. Which would denote to the Magi in Babylon, who are star watchers, the early astronomers, that not only a king was being born in Leo, the lion tribe, but a super king. And this would fit the prophecies that Daniel, no doubt, took to Babylon. Daniel went to Babylon taking these prophecies with him, and Daniel became head over all of the astrologers, wise men, magi. No doubt he taught these prophecies. You watch for a sign of a king being born in Judah. This was the sign. Could have been the sign. I'm going to say this. Could have been the sign. Everything we've ever seen about Jesus, every movie we've seen about his birth, has this great, big, bright star, right? That wasn't the case at all, because when the Magi went to Herod and said, we saw his star in the east, Herod said, what in the world are you talking about? What? So it wasn't something obvious like we see in the movies, like a bright comet or supernova or something obvious. Because Herod and everybody in Judah had no idea what the Magi were talking about. They were talking about something like this that they had seen and had significance, that a super king was being born in the lion tribe of Judah. And they went. Now the light will declare his second coming. Joel tells us, and I will show wonders in the heavens and on the earth, blood and fire and columns of smoke. The sun shall be turned to darkness, the moon to blood, before the great and awesome day of the Lord. Joel is the first witness that the moon will turn to blood. Jesus, and there will be signs in the sun and moon and stars. And on the earth distress and nations in perplexity because of the roaring of the sea and the waves. Like that tsunami that took out 250,000 people about 6 years ago. People will be terrified at the roaring of the sea. People fainting with fear, with foreboding of what is coming on the world. For the powers of the heavens will be shaken, and then they will see the Son of Man coming in cloud with power and great glory. Peter, the third witness, standing with the 11, lifted up his voice and addressed them. I will show wonders in the heavens above, signs on the earth below, blood and fire and vapors of smoke. The sun shall be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the great day of the Lord comes, the great and magnificent day. Then we have John, Revelation 6:12. When he opened the sixth seal, the full moon became like blood. This is a blood moon. This is a total lunar eclipse. That is when the sun casts the earth's shadow onto the moon. The moon takes on this copper or even brilliant red color. A full moon, a total lunar eclipse, is a blood moon. Now watch this. According to the NASA website, okay, a tetrad is 4 total lunar eclipses or blood moons occurring in sequence, one after the other, after the other, after the other. 4 blood moons, total lunar eclipses. From 1900 to the year 2100, there have been and will be 13 tetrads. So they're not all that rare. They're not. They occur every 10 to 20 years. Okay? In the last century, in the 20th century, there were 5 of them. In 1909 and 10, 27 and 28, 49, 50, 67, 68, 85, 86, 5 tetrads. In this century, the 21st century, there's going to be 8 of them. 03, 04, there was a tetrad, 4 blood moons. 14 and 15, 32, 33, then on down to 90, 91. There's going to be 8 of them. But what makes these rare? In the last century, out of the 5, only 2 of them occurred on Passover and Tabernacles, Sukkot. That was in 4950 and 6768. In this century, out of the 8, only 1 of them occur on Passover and Sukkot, and that's this year, next year. Only once in this century will a tetrad occur on the feast days. Now, so what? What happened when it occurred in 49, 40, and 50? The 4950 tetrad followed the fulfillment of Isaiah 66:8, which says, quote, "Who has heard such a thing? Who has seen such things? Shall a land be born in one day? Shall a nation be brought forth in one moment?" And the answer to those questions is yes. For as soon as Zion was in labor, she brought forth her children. As soon as Zion was in labor, the Holocaust. Immediately after the Holocaust, the nation was born. Israel was born and brought forth on May 14, 1948. After she was in labor, the Holocaust, she was brought forth and born on May 14, 1948, and then God punctuated the fulfillment of that prophecy with the tetrad in the years 49 and 50, during which time they fought wars to maintain their land. Now, this is Isaiah 66:8, talking about the birth of Israel. And verse 10 of Isaiah 66, the tetrad, the 66-68 tetrad occurred around the recapture of control of Jerusalem in June of 1967. During the 6-day war, they recaptured control of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. And this is in fulfillment of Isaiah 66:10. "Rejoice with Jerusalem and be glad for her, all you who love her. Rejoice with her and joy, all you who mourn over her, that you may nurse and be satisfied from her consoling breast, that you may drink deeply with delight from her glorious abundance." This rejoicing over Jerusalem occurred in June 1967 during the 6-day war when Israel gained control over Jerusalem in fulfillment of Isaiah 66:10 and 11. 1948 was the fulfillment of Isaiah 66:8. 1967 was the fulfillment of Isaiah 66:10 regarding Jerusalem. And God punctuated that with a tetrad. 4 blood moons on Passover and Tabernacles. So what does it mean? The only tetrad of the 21st century to correspond with the feasts, again according to the NASA website, April 15, 2014 will be total eclipse. That was last spring. Did you guys see it? You didn't? A friend of mine in Fairbanks, Alaska got a time-lapse photograph, and there's like 4 blood moons all right in a row. Yeah, it's so cool, the photo. The second one will be on October 8th of this year, a blood moon. The third one will be on April 4th, next spring. And then the fourth one will be on September 28th, next fall. Total. And look what they correspond to. April 15th was Passover. October 8th will be Tabernacles or Sukkot. April 4, next spring, Passover. September 28th, next September, Sukkot. We'll hit these feast days. The only tetrad of the 21st century. The 2014-15 tetrad is occurring. I want you to get this, because this is something that we're witnessing right now. It's occurring at a time when Israel is under intense pressure to divide the land in a 2-state solution with the Palestinians to form a Palestinian state, to live side by side in, quote, peace and security. That is going to happen in fulfillment of Joel 3:2. Look what Joel 3:2 says. I will gather all the nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, and I will enter into judgment with them there on behalf of my people and my heritage Israel, because they have scattered them among the nations and have divided up my land. The dividing of the land and a 2-state solution of Israel and Palestine is what makes God so angry that he gathers all the nations and he will enter into judgment upon all the nations for dividing up his land. This is what they're trying to do right now. And you know who's leading this process? We are. The U.S. is leading this peace process to divide up the land of Israel. And God says, I will enter into judgment on all nations for doing that. This is going to happen. We are going to witness this happen. Let's break this down. The first blood moon was April 14, 2014. That was on Nisan 15, which is Passover. The second blood moon will be this October 8th, which will be Tishrei 15, which is the Feast of Sukkot or Tabernacles. Catch this. Said the sun will be darkened and the moon will turn to blood. Next March 20th, there's going to be a total solar eclipse. 2 weeks later, there's going to be a third blood moon on Nisan 15. On April 4th, 2015, there's going to be a third blood moon. And then September 13th, 2015, which is Elul 29, the last day of the year, going into Tishrei 1, which is Rosh Hashanah, the Feast of Trumpets. This is going to be a partial solar eclipse, followed 2 weeks later, by fourth blood moon on September 28th, it's just, but look at this. It's not just a blood moon. It's going to be a rare super moon. The moon doesn't revolve around the earth in a circle. It's an elliptical pattern. So there's times that the moon seems bigger than normal. That's called a supermoon because it's closer to the earth at those times. Well, the fourth blood moon is not only a total lunar eclipse, it's a total eclipse, it's a blood moon, and it's a supermoon. It's like the trifecta. Next September 2015, September 29th, I'm wrapping this up. I know I'm going on, but I'm wrapping this up. But I want you to notice something else that's going to affect this nation. Because I think all this, the blood moons are pointing to Israel. I think something major is going to happen with Israel. But this, notice a partial solar eclipse on September 13th next year, 2015, which will be Elul 29 in Tishri 1, the last day of the year going into the first day of the year on the Hebrew calendar. This is going to blow your mind. September 11th, 2001, we were attacked. The Twin Towers in New York came down by 2 planes. The World Trade Centers, representing America's financial power, came down. The third plane hit the Pentagon, representing America's military power, was hit. September 11, 2001 was God taking his hand off of this nation and turning us over. I absolutely believe that this nation has been turned over. Evidence of that is judges overturning bans on gay marriage. If you look at Romans chapter 1, says that God's wrath is already being poured out. And the evidence of God's wrath being poured out on a nation is homosexuality. Homosexuality and its prevalence, and gay marriage and its ascendance, they're not precursors to God's wrath. They are evidence of God's wrath. They're evidence of God turning the country over and hands off. Look at okay, now let me get back to this. Elul 29, and I am wrapping up. On September 17, 2001, the stock market opened after the September 11 attacks, and it suffered its third worst single-day loss with a drop of 684 points. September 17, 2001, on the Hebrew calendar is Elul 29. Elul 29. On September 17th, the stock market crashed 684 points. On the Hebrew calendar, it was Elul 29. Now, jump forward 7 years. On September 29, 2008, the stock market suffered its worst single-day loss with a drop of 777. Is that not symbolic of what? 777. September 29 on 2008 was Elul 29, the same day on the Hebrew calendar, but 7 years later. The same day on the Hebrew calendar. America suffered this dramatic economic collapse. The next in this 7-year pattern of God letting us go is September 13th next year, 2 weeks before the blood moon. September 13th next year will be that 7-year mark of Elul 29. I predict another major financial collapse next September 13th on Elul 29. It happened in 01, happened in 08. Let's see if it happens in 15. If the pattern sticks. And now I am wrapping up this, and one more slide and will be it, and I'm done. By the evidence of 2 witnesses, Jesus said, every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. Regarding his appointed times, his moed, Jesus has given us 2 witnesses. One, the lights in the sky, to mark his seasons, his moed, his appointed times. And 2, the Jewish feasts that serve to mark his appointed times. These are the 2 witnesses that God has given us to mark his appointed times. Rarely have these 2 witnesses spoken in conjunction. But when they have, significant events of war regarding Israel have occurred. These witnesses are speaking together once again and for the last time this century. The feasts and the lights will not coincide again for the rest of this century after 2015. Do you see what I'm saying here? You've got the 2 witnesses, the lights, the blood moons, the eclipses, and the feast days. They are now speaking together at the same time. This has only happened rarely. And this won't happen again for the rest of this century. It is likely that Israel will be coerced into a 2-state peace plan. This abomination, because God says, I'll enter into judgment on all nations for dividing up my land. This abomination will cause the desolation of the West Bank. The West Bank is what they want for a Palestinian state. The West Bank is Judea and Samaria. And this is the place where Jesus said, when talking about the end times, he says, when the abomination of desolation occurs, let those in Judea and Samaria run. I believe the dividing up of the land is that desolation, that abomination that will cause the desolation of the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. And the U.S., which may be Mystery Babylon, that's a whole other study which I won't go into. And the U.S. who pushed this plan will suffer initially with a devastating economic collapse next fall. I'm predicting that will happen like it has the past 2 cycles, 7-year cycles. It has happened. I believe it will happen again, and I believe that Israel will be coerced into a 2-state solution. They're going to make a Palestinian state. And in order to enforce that, the UN will send in an army. The United Nations will go in to enforce the boundaries. And the UN represents the world. All the nations are represented by the UN. And where is the UN? New York. Where did God strike the U.S.? New York. The Twin Towers came down in New York. The lander struck in New York. In fact, New York was where this country was inaugurated as a country. George Washington inaugurated the United States as a nation in New York. So it's not a coincidence that that's where the Twin Towers came down. It's not a coincidence. It's not coincidence. That's where the United Nations that represents all of the world are headquartered in New York. And when the UN goes in to enforce this two-state solution, God is going to enter into judgment on that. And that, my friends, is it. That's the blood moons. So be prepared. Look for this. This is what's happening right now. And so we live in very exciting times. All right. Thank you for your attention.